Our reading comes from Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all that I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
Well, this is our fourth week in our series on Do Unto Others. And if you've been with us the last 3 weeks, we've talked about some weighty subjects. We've talked about polarization and cancel culture and idolatry, and we're just going to keep the good times going today. We're going to talk about judgment, and we're going to talk about our uncanny ability that all of us have to spot the speck in our brother or sister's eyes while ignoring the log in our own. I want to make a distinction, though, that I think might be helpful for all of us. When I talk about judgment, I think when Jesus talks about judgment, he's not talking about discernment. There's a difference between judgment and discernment. Discernment, yes, it involves judgment, like exercising the freedom and responsibility God gives us to make choices. And we have to be able to weigh those choices. I mean, when we vote, and 2 weeks from now, we will be exercising our judgment. And that's okay. That's a freedom and responsibility, not just that our country gives us, but that God gives us all. And much good comes in the world through people of good judgment, mature, sincere, thoughtful, informed judgment is a good thing, something we should honor and celebrate. Same way, the opposite of hasty, uninformed, biased judgment is a bad thing. It can bring in bad things, but we should celebrate the way good judgment can lead to good things. When I talk about judgment, though, I'm talking about a different kind of judgment. Not judging between two options or two choices. I'm talking about judging another person, specifically their value and their worth. And usually when we exercise this kind of judgment, we have in our minds a hierarchy of some people being of higher worth, higher value than others. And when we cast this kind of judgment on others, and all of us do it, when we do, usually it's because we're trying in some way to elevate ourselves about our own inadequacies, our own mistakes. When we cast judgment, we feel better than so-and-so, whoever that person might be. And because there's this looking, when we judge from an elevated position, looking down. Perhaps the better word that I'm really talking about isn't just judgment, it's contempt. You know what I'm talking about when I say contempt? It's looking down on someone else. And when we express contempt for someone else, what contempt does is it breeds in them humiliation. We all know the experience of humiliation, right? It's where you feel ashamed, embarrassed, lower than dirt, which is how we get the word humiliation. It comes from the Latin word humus, which is not hummus that you eat, it's humus meaning earth or ground. So we feel lower than dirt when we're humiliated. And we experience humiliation all the time, right? Like you forget someone's name that you should know, you feel humiliated. You're having an argument, discussion with someone, and you quote some fact or figure that you are sure is correct, and then you find out afterwards you are completely wrong. You were humiliated. You trip and you fall, around other people, and you feel humiliated. Or, there's that moment where the basketball net is not quite hanging down and you just got to jump up and grab the net and you go for it and you only clear about 6, maybe even 3 inches off the ground. That's more of a biographical example in my own case. And all my friends were laughing at me, but I was humiliated. Except in that example I just gave, I mean, the truth, I can remember that moment. It was years ago, right when Jamie and I got married, and she realized, oh, our kids are going to have 0 ups someday. But I was, all my friends were laughing at it, but they were my friends, which took the sting a little bit out of humiliation, right? But imagine if they weren't my friends. Imagine if it was people that were enemies or opponents, people who I knew didn't like me in some way. That would make the sting of humiliation even worse. None of us likes to experience judgment or contempt. We protect ourselves. So what do we do when we are experiencing humiliation? Well, we defend ourselves in a variety of ways. One is we can rationalize the behavior. Like, oh, well, there's a reason I did that, and if I just explain it, then everyone will understand. Another is we can, pretend it didn't happen. Especially, you ever trip and fall, and the first thing you do is you look around to see, did anyone else see that? And if they didn't, then no harm, no foul. Like a tree falls in the forest, no one hears it, we're good. But the most frequent thing I think we do is we blame others for our mistakes. And sometimes we even blame the person that we've wronged in some way. Like it's their fault that they're feeling humiliated, right? Like it's their mistake. I guess what I'm saying is to defend ourselves against judgment, against humiliation, against contempt, one of the things that we most often do is we just turn around that judgment on others. Because that's how we're feeling. We're feeling humiliated, lower than dirt. But if we can claim the high ground again and minimize their judgment on us, we feel better. So we tell ourselves, well, they're just jerks, or they're not educated, I'm way smarter than they are, or they haven't accomplished near the stuff I have, or their kids are spoiled, rotten, can you believe how bad parents they are, or their fantasy football team stinks, and again, that last one's biographical, but you know what I'm saying? We minimize others because we say to ourselves, if we establish the high ground, then their judgment has no value or merit. We can't be humiliated by it. But you see what happens? This judgment cycle continues. Just to make it clear, when we're judged, we experience humiliation. But then when we turn around and judge others, we foster humiliation in them, and the cycle continues, and we just keep building up walls of shame and resentment and anger. So how do we get out of this cycle? How do we break the cycle of mutual judgment that exists in our world today? Think about all the discourse you see on the news, the discourse between candidates, the discourse, even sometimes people talking in coffee shops or in your neighborhoods or in your offices. How do you break this cycle of mutual judgment that's taking place? Well, I think Jesus' story gives us some insight into it. So let's go back to the story we heard Michael read just a moment ago. And I just want to note for a moment who Jesus was talking to. He says, at the very beginning, he says, to some who are confident of their own righteousness and look down on everyone else. So in other words, these were people who held a higher plane, a high moral ground, and they looked down at everyone else with contempt. They were less than, lower than. Perhaps even Jesus, they looked down on Jesus. They certainly looked down on all the people that Jesus hung out with. Sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes. I mean, they were lower than low. And so to them, Jesus tells this story. And in his story, there's two characters. There's a tax collector and a Pharisee. The Pharisee is the one we meet first. Pharisees were experts in the law. They were renowned for their commitment and obedience to the law. And in this story, the Pharisee is sure of himself. He stands at a distance from others because, again, he's looking down on them, and he prays, "Dear God, I thank you that I am not like other people." And he names them: robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even this tax collector. He points out the guy in his presence and says, "Thank you, I am not like him." And then he touts his own qualifications. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all I get. He's righteous, right? He does the law. And yet something is twisted in his spirit. He's filled with contempt, not love for his fellow human beings. And Jesus then holds up a contrast and he says, in the same space, at the same time, in the same temple, praying to the same God, a tax collector stands at a distance. And note his posture. He doesn't stand upright. He's not looking up to heaven. Instead, he wouldn't lift his head. He looks down and he beats his breast and he says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Now, we already said the Pharisee is a picture of contempt. And my question to you is the tax collector a picture of humiliation? And I would just point out something in the story. Jesus says, those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled. He doesn't say those who humiliate themselves will be exalted and those who exalt themselves will be humiliated. What's the difference, I'm asking, between humiliation and humility? Is there a difference? Let me just think about that with me for a second. Like, when you're humiliated, what do? As I said, you put up walls. Because you feel exposed and vulnerable. Everyone can see. Everyone, your flaws are on display for everyone. So you put up walls, you defend, you attack, you blame, you judge. That's what you do. But in humility, what's the experience of humility? Is you actually let those walls down. You accept, hey, I'm not perfect. You acknowledge the mistakes you've made. And you're open to other people. You allow yourself to be vulnerable. You allow yourself to be seen. There's a huge difference between humility and humiliation. I began thinking about this through a book that I received through a group called Colossian Forum that we've used a lot here at the church whenever we've kind of gone through conflict, transformation. And it's this blog I send out once a month, just kind of a devotion. It was written by one of the members of their staff named Tanner Smith. And he talked about the difference between humiliation and humility. I never really quite thought about the difference. He pointed out they both come from the same word in Latin, humus, meaning ground or earth. But he suggests the difference between them is huge. He says humiliation is like dirt. If you know anything about the difference between dirt and soil, dirt has no organic ingredients in it. Dirt is it's a component of soil, but there's nothing, no nutrients, no bacteria, nothing in it that's breaking it down, and therefore it doesn't give life. Nothing grows in dirt. He says that's what humiliation is like. It's not life-giving, it's dead. Soil, on the other hand, has a lot of organic stuff in it. It has worms, bacteria, insects, breaking it down in order to create nutrients that give life. Soil even breathes, taking in oxygen, breathing out carbon dioxide. He says that's what humility is. It's soil in which good things can grow. And my point is this. When you think about your own experience, your own life, when you experience things in life that kind of cause shame, embarrassment, when you're feeling judged, how do you respond? Do you respond putting up walls to have that feeling of humiliation? Or is there another choice to recognize that I can respond in a moment of the spirit of humility with humbleness, to acknowledge my mistakes, to open myself up to others, to give life? Go forward 2 slides if you don't mind. I love this quote. It says that our failures don't have to be the cause for our humiliation, but our failures instead can be the reminders to be humble, reminders of humility. Let me give you a practical example just to flesh this out. A couple weeks ago in fall break, we were on vacation as a family. We're all in this hotel room, and my son and I started teasing my wife, Jamelyn, about something. I'm not even sure we remember what it was. We were teasing her. And as sometimes happens, we carried the teasing a little too far. And Jamelyn in that moment kind of stood up from the bed and she goes, well, now I'm humiliated, and walked to the bathroom. Now, she didn't know I just read this blog like 3 days earlier, but when she said that word, now I'm humiliated, you know what went through my mind? Ruh-roh. We carried this too far, this teasing, right? Now, but here's the irony, right? The crazy part. While she was in the bathroom, like in my head, like I'm doing this inner dialogue, and my first response was not empathy or sensitivity. My first response was defensiveness. I thought to myself, hey, we didn't do anything. We were just teasing. Can't she take a joke? You know, like putting the blame on her, judging her for feeling humiliated. Isn't that crazy? But that's what was going through my head. And luckily, Jamelyn was in there for a few minutes, and I had a few minutes to own my own stuff and to recognize, oof, no, this isn't her fault. And so when she came back in the room, I kind of went to her, whispered, and just said, I'm really sorry. That's not at all how I would ever want you to feel. And she replied back, it's okay. I know you love me. We're good. But can you see the difference? If I had stayed stuck in that, if she'd stayed stuck in that cycle of humiliation and judgment, it would have spun off in bad ways. It would have ruined the evening. But just a moment of acknowledgement, in humility saying, I'm sorry, I messed up. And her being able to receive and respond to that, it breaks that cycle. So contempt breeds humiliation, right? It builds walls of self-justification. But humility leads to forgiveness. The mark of a life that's truly been justified. Think about Jesus' story. Let's take it back. He said, who went home justified? Not the one who was so confident in his own righteousness. Not the one who was looking down with contempt on others. The one who humbled himself, who opened himself, who allowed God to forgive him. And then it's not just that he experienced forgiveness, but rather he experienced justification in the sense of his life being put right, his heart being put right. That's what God desires for all of us to do. So in the week to come, I guarantee it, you're going to have a moment where you feel humiliated. I don't know when it's going to happen. It might happen at work. It might happen at home. It might happen with a neighbor. It might happen at the coffee shop. Somewhere, someone is going to say something that's going to tweak your spirit, and your instant response is going to want to be defend. Will you, in that moment, remember the path of humility? What did it look like to take down the walls, to open yourselves up, to acknowledge none of us is perfect, and to see the other person for who they are, not as a threat, not as an enemy, not as someone we have to defend ourselves against, not as someone who's attacking, even if they are attacking. Can we love them, serve them the way Christ has loved and served us? That's the path of humility. I'm going to invite Jamelyn to come forward after I told that story about us. And Jamelyn, as we've done all series long, we are have invited someone to share with me the message and reflect on it together. Now, Jamelyn has been volunteering all week at the Children's Museum with the haunted house, and she lost her voice. Happens when you're screaming at kids, I guess. So, or just talking to kids.
I was a friendly witch.
You were a friendly witch, yes. So, her voice is about gone, so you have to lean in a little bit to hear. But Jamelyn,
I just want to start by saying I do remember what you were teasing me about.
This morning you said you didn't.
Yeah, it's all coming back to me now.
No, it's all coming back. It's coming back to me.
So, go ahead.
No, I was done singing. So
thank you. We all thank you. So when Dave said that we were going to be talking about humility, I got to thinking about when I was a children's pastor. We used a curriculum that each month had a different virtue. And actually, Tracy said it in her children's moment, which is humility is putting others first by giving up what you think you deserve. And when I was thinking about that, I think the part that a lot of people get hung up on is the second part, is giving up what you think you deserve. Like, I deserve this, I deserve that.
Right.
And so I got to thinking about, what are some of the things that I think I deserve. Now, if you get a paycheck that does not have taxes taken out of it, that can be a little frustrating. And I'm learning this now that I've started real estate, is the check I get, it's not actually the check I get. And so there are times I'm like, I deserve all this money. I worked really hard for
Right.
it. And then I have to remember, like, oh no, I've lived in a country where people don't pay taxes. And in Haiti, the roads are terrible. There's no grid, really. I mean, so that can be really hard, though, is when you have something you think, I worked so hard for this, I deserve this, this is mine.
Well, when Jamin shared that with me, and we started thinking of like, well, what are some other things we think we deserve? And I think it was maybe because we're coming off this vacation, I thought, first one that sprung to my mind was, I deserve to be treated well if I'm paying for it. Right? Like if I'm at a nice restaurant, I'm paying money, I want to be treated well. If I'm at a hotel that's costly, especially in today's culture where they ask for tips everywhere, right? And sometimes I'm like, what have you done to earn this tip? You've like given me a receipt, but underneath that is that play, like I deserve to be treated well in return for this money I'm paying, like this transaction.
Then I got to thinking when we got home from vacation, and we have this beautiful home, and I was thinking, I deserve these nice things. I worked really hard. I went to school. I worked hard. I deserve these really nice things. Instead of seeing them as blessings and gifts, I think we can get caught up on thinking, no, this is what I deserve. This is what I worked for. Instead of realizing, oh no, because I worked really hard, this is the blessing and the gift I receive. It changes the way you look at those things that you've been given.
Yeah, and I think for me, work itself, one of the things I think a lot or underneath is like, I deserve for my work to be seen, recognized, appreciated by others. And this is the deep irony. I told that to Jane, and she's like, but Dave, you hate compliments.
It's so ridiculous.
I was like, I know, I'm terrible at receiving compliments, but all the same, I want my work to be seen.
It's also ridiculous because I told him I wanted to take all his daily devotions he's written, because call me biased, but I think they're pretty good. I'm like, let's package those. Let's share those with other people. He's like, oh, I don't know about that.
and I don't know if that's humility or humiliation speaking, but but it is funny. I'm complex in that way.
Well, here I'm going to skip a little bit more. So here are some that I also thought of. I thought I deserved to be loved and respected by my kids. I had 2 C-sections. I deserve to say what I think and be listened to, even though I know I do talk a lot. And I deserve to be respected for who I am and what I've done in life. And the big one is I deserve, as a Dodger fan, to win the World Series. That's my big one.
Right. And when we started talking about this, we realized, a lot of these things we think we deserve are under the surface. It's not like we walk around feeling and talking about being entitled, but it's like you become aware of it when you don't receive what you expect, right? Like, as long as you're getting what you deserve, then hey, you don't even think about it. It's when you aren't receiving it that suddenly you become aware, oh, I think I deserve something else than what I've received.
So the one example that hit me when we were talking about that is, I know you guys have heard me talk a lot about being in the earthquake in Haiti, but one thing I've never really shared with people is the experience of getting out of the country. So they get everybody to the tarmac at the airport.
Because the airport
had collapsed
demolished,
in the earthquake. This is back in 2010. And we all had like these little squares on the tarmac to wait in until it was our turn to go get into the different jets that the Air Force
and let me just say, this has been a journey of days just to get to the airport.
Correct, yeah.
And it's been, all the stress, all the worry.
And I was the team lead. I had 10 people. It was a thing. And so, I'm trying to be humble, and there's all these it wasn't just Americans. Actually, there were 10 white Americans and everybody else were Haitian Americans around us with visas and passports and all that kind of stuff, who, by the way, deserve to go to the U.S. That's key. Anyway, I'm standing there and everyone seems to be passing by me. Everyone's gone and got on planes. I feel like I've gone through 3 van loads of people and I'm still standing there. And
Is it like that experience when you're at a restaurant and someone who comes in
Oh.
after you gets their
Get
food
seated?
first? Yeah.
1,000%.
But multiplied by, yeah. 1,000.
Because I'm ready to go home and I haven't bathed in 10 days or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, I finally kind of lose my mind on an an embassy worker who is Haitian. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. These people are cutting and da-da-da. I'm like, and it's so loud because, those jets have like the propellers, and he says, he can't hear me real well, and I think, so he pulls me into his Suburban.
I think he heard you.
And then he lit into me, and he's like, listen, you're getting ready to go home. My family lives here. I don't even know where some of my family members are. I am working to try and get you out of this country, and this is the way you treat me. And I mean, it was like 5 days of stress, but I was so humiliated because I knew I had acted badly. And I get out of the Suburban and go back to my little square on the tarmac, and I'm like doing one of these things, and there was like a 19-year-old National Guardsman in front of me, and you could tell he wanted to do something, and he takes out of his pocket, he has 2 the things you put in your ears. So
Earplugs.
Earplugs, and that's all he could offer me. And I thought, now thinking back of it, I'm like, even he was serving, and here I'm like being, he left his home and everything. And it's really hard when what you think you deserve overtakes you in a moment when you have to remember what humility really is and what God calls us to be in our humbleness.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that story because, to me, it just illustrates how close humility and humiliation are, right? Like, you're trying to be humble and let others go first, and then something snapped, and then that led to humiliation. But for me, I think the really cool part of the story is that guardsman, who I think it would have been so easy for him to judge you, to just view you with contempt, and instead, there was something in you that he empathized with. He saw your sadness, and he didn't have anything to offer except earplugs, but that was a moment of offering kindness, offering grace. So what we're trying to talk about, I guess, is just a shift from all of us. It's not that we don't deserve things. It's just a shift in mentality from thinking about what we deserve to instead asking ourselves, how can I serve? In this moment, in this place, with this person, how can I serve? And Tracy talked about it in our children's moment, but I just want to take us for a moment back to the story of Jesus' Last Supper. And Jesus had every reason to be entitled. He could have talked about all the things he deserved, but when he was with his disciples, he got down on his knees, took a servant's towel, wrapped it around his waist, and began washing their feet, which was the job that was usually only slaves or servants did. It was a job for the lowest. And in that moment, the disciples, I think they experienced some humiliation, like, why are you doing this? And they said, Jesus said, I set you an example. You call me Master and Lord, and I'm doing this for you. So we're going to close our service today. We're running a little long. We want to close our service today by inviting you to wash one another's feet. Andy Stanley says you can't wash feet from a distance. You can't wash feet from an elevated position. Can't even do it eye to eye. You got to get down to wash someone else's feet. And he says, imagine if our country began, can you imagine Congress opening session, them washing each other's feet? What a difference that could make. And he says, well, what difference could it make if the church actually did that? So here's what we're going to do. We have stations across the front, at the back. We want to invite you to come and wash one another's hands and feet. So most of the stations are hand washing stations, which means when you come forward, you simply present your hands. Someone's going to wash your hands and then dry them. And then after you receive a hand washing, you're invited to turn around and wash the next person's hands, whether you know them or not, as an act of service and love to them. And that's how, and then foot washing stations will go this exact same way. We have chairs lined up over there for if you're going to a foot washing station to take your shoes off, your socks off, and put them back on. And there's 4 in the back, 6 at the front, so you can go to whatever station you feel led and called. Kiki's going to lead us in some music. I invite us now, I'm going to say a prayer, and I invite you, just under the prompting of the Spirit, to serve someone and to receive the gift of being served by them. Let's pray. Oh Lord Christ, we give you thanks that you set us an example of service, that you not only taught us to practice humility, but you showed us how to do it. Be present with us now, Lord. Continue to bring down walls to make us one, to make us your people, to show us how to shine your light in the world around us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.